Hey guys, and thank you for clicking on this video. In this video we will discuss for loops, and what for loops are we can loop over a piece of code over and over again. We'll explain everything once we get to our desktop. Before we begin, note that there are also exercises in the link below, and let's get over to our desktop. So before we get to the for loop, I want to introduce you guys to a new data type. So we have covered already the integer, which is a whole number, like 5 or 4 or 3. We also covered a float type number, which is a number with a decimal. So 4.21, 6.2, doesn't matter too much. And we also covered a string. So for example, hello world. So everything with this in between quotes is what's called a string. So now another data type we have is what is called a list. And within a list, we can basically store all those other data types. So we can have multiple values. So let's say I want to have a variable of data type list. So X is now a list, and I want to give it multiple values. So I can give it multiple values like 5, 2, 4, maybe another 5. So it doesn't matter what I put in this list. So this will be one object where all these numbers will be stored in. I can also give them float numbers, 5.2, 6.7, for example. And I can even combine them with normal integers and also with strings. So this is basically a place where we can store multiple objects. So this will, where we can store multiple data types. So we want to store this as an object. So we call it a list object. And what we can do with the list object is we can actually start looping over to the list. So if we now run this code, you see nothing happens. If we say print out X, it will give us the entire list. But what if we want to have an individual item from this list? So let's say we want to get the second item from the list. So we want to say print X and note the brackets. And now we want to get the second item. And you might be wondering, why are you filling in this one here? Well, we want the second item of this list. That's because that's something called indexing. And indexing starts with 0. So this item, the 5.23, will be starting at index 0. 6.7 will be at index 1. 5 at index 2. And hello at index 4. So this is basic indexing of a list. And it's useful to know that for later on, since we might use this a lot in the future. So just know for now, this is the indexing, and we can use this later on. So this is how we can get a specific element from that list. But what if we want all the items from this list? So we want not only this 5.2 or this 6.7, we want every item. What we can do is we can use a for loop. So we can say for item in X. And note the tab in the front of this. So every time I put a double point, there's a tab in front of it. This means we start our code block. And in here we can type everything that needs to happen inside of the for loop. So we can, for example, print out item. And what this is going to do, it's going to loop through the entire list. So it is going to take this first, the zeroed item first, so the 5.23. It prints out this 5.23. Then this code will be executed, so it will be done printing this. It will go over again inside of the for loop. So then it will go to 6.7 and up until the end of the list. So if we print this out right now, we can see everything from within that list will be printed nicely underneath each other. So this is something useful. You can also make chessboards or make squares and make stuff with just only for loops. And those will also be in the exercises to create a square, to create a triangle by just using for loops. And one other thing I want to introduce you guys to is a function called the range function. So the range function is something which we can use inside of a for loop. So we want to say for number in range 3 or 4, for example. And then we want to print out number. And we can see it's going to print out every number up till 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And within this range function, so if we have the range function, we have normally something called parameters. So if we call a function, so this is what's called a function. In a later video, we'll discover more in depth what functions are. But for now, just remember, inside of the range function, we have a start, a stop, and a step size. So this might come, this can be useful later on. So let's say I do not want to print out numbers from 0 up until 3, but I want to do the reverse. So I can say I want to start at 4, I want to stop at 0, and I want the step size of -1. So it's going to count down from 4 to 0 instead of adding 1 up each time. So let's print this out, and you can see 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is something you can try to make in your homework exercises. So what we covered today is the list function, how to use it, and what are the use cases for it. Later on, we'll go over more in depth what the functions, what the lists are, and how we can incorporate them in other code, and what's the use case of this list. We covered the for loops. You also do a lot of homework exercise with the for loop. For loop makes sure you can iterate over iteratable items. And iteratable items are pieces where you can loop over it, like the 5.23, 6.7, so it goes one at a time. So the range function is also an iterable function, which you can loop over. Not every function has that, but range function is one of those functions where you can loop over it. That's why we use it inside of this for loop. And the last thing is we also learned about the range function. What is it? How can we use it? What are parameters? And also a short introduction to functions. In a later video, we'll go over more in depth what functions are and how we can use them to write cleaner code and more efficient code. So this was it for this video. I hope you liked it. Make the exercises. I will put a link down in the description for my GitHub repository where you can make the exercises. And I hope to see you guys in a later video. See ya.